What's up everybody? Welcome back to another quick tips video. Welcome. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about something I'm really passionate about, and that is kind of like music theory and chord progressions. We've already done some quick tips videos on theory, but let's dive a little further into it today and talk about a couple ways to make your chord progressions a little more interesting, you know? And when we think of chord progressions, typically we think of like pop music and even a lot of modern film music that uses 3 to 4 chords in a certain progression and then repeats it over and over, especially in pop music. You know, in film music, you have the action on the screen that's kind of directing the way the music is going a little bit more. But where we have pop music, it's a standalone piece of music, and the driving force behind it is kind of the chord progression. So that just repeats over and over, and the rest of the music goes on top of that. But let's say you're trying to get a little more interesting with your chord progressions, and you want to take your chord progressions from more of like a pop song structure to more of maybe a musical theater structure or a slightly more classical structure, right? And you want to just make it more lively and interesting. So I have two methods to kind of show you that. The first one is relatively simple. Instead of just making it 3 or 4 chords, why not extend it to at least 5, 6, maybe even 7 or 8 chords? And the most simple way to demonstrate this is diatonically, or within the major minor scale. So let's just use a classic example here. Let's choose a 4 chord progression. Let's use G major, for example. And tell you what, I'll actually pull up my keyboard here, Synthesia, so you can actually see what I'm playing. You don't really need to see the contact interface here. So I'm going to choose a chord progression in G major here. I'm going to go 1. Let's go with 6, 4, 5. 1, 6, 4, 5. Right? So that sounds fine. It sounds kind of classical, but you can tell, you know, over the course of a song, it's going to get repetitive. So one of the classic ways you can extend it is having the bass line do something interesting and actually going diatonically down the scale. And this is a progression I really love because it sounds like you're going away from the tonic, away from the one note, which is the G, going all the way down the scale, and then you actually somehow end up back in G. And it's really cool. So you have 1, 5, first inversion, 6, 1 second inversion, 4, 1 first inversion, 2, 5, 1. So if you just take a look at this left hand here, I just basically went down the G major scale. I made the C go up there because it was getting a little bit too low, so I wanted to bring it up a little bit. But that's one way to do it. Another way to extend your chord progression is literally to introduce more chords. You know, if you're only using 4 chords, you have 3 more to play with. You know, the 7 chord is obviously a little bit less desirable just because on its own it's a diminished triad, right? But let's say we have 1, 4, 5, 6, 3, 2, 5, and then back to 1, for example. Now that's still completely diatonic, but you can see we're introducing the other chords of the scale a little bit more, so you have a little more color. You know, you have these possibilities, so just use them, right? And again, it's entirely contextual. It depends on what you're going for, but extending it is one of those keys there. Now the other method I like to use is bringing in chords from other scales, or you could say modal mixture, right? Secondary dominance is also a good tool. Trito substitution, which is more of a jazz thing, but it could definitely be useful. And also chromaticism. So if you're going from one chord to another, you can use a chromatic chord as like a passing chord to get to that destination, you know? So just an example. If you look at the song Beauty and the Beast, classic example, tale as old as time. So I'm going to play it in the original key, D flat major. So it's 1 to 4, back to 1. So this is kind of like 5. I'm adding the 7. So make it 5, 7. Right there we have this 3 chord, which is really nice, F minor. till we get this 6 chord, which is B flat minor, E flat minor, 7, and that's the 2 chord to 5, right? So that's the first half of it. But what I wanted to show you is the secondary dominant coming up. Da, da, say the least. Da, 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 da. Right here. Then you get this resolution right there. So that one chord, small to say the least. Now this chord right here is called a secondary dominant. So we're basically taking the dominant of another note in the scale that's not the tonic note. So in the key of D flat major, you have, you know, all of the scale notes, right? But what's the chord that we're heading to at this moment of the song? So we have, so to say the least, both a little scared. And here, this F sharp, or you could say G flat major chord, that's kind of our destination for this one sentence, or for this phrase. So you go backwards and you say, well, what is this, what is the dominant of that certain chord? And in that case, that was the 4 chord, because the F sharp major or G flat major is the 4 chord in D flat major. So we take the 5/7 of that, which is D flat 7, and you notice we have this B natural or C flat, and that's the new note that we don't have in the regular D flat major scale. So having that note in there introduces a little more color, and then you can resolve back to the 4 chord in D flat major. So for a moment there, you got that extra texture, which is just beautiful. You know, that's one element of adding in more color, is having that, having these secondary dominants and these notes that don't quite belong in the regular scale, bringing those in for a moment. That's really cool. So modes also fits really well into this. You know, you can use Lydian, Dorian, Mixed Lydian, all these really cool modes. A really cool resource to check out on that is Rick Beato. He has entire compositions based on modal set scales, so I would definitely check those out. One more I wanted to demonstrate was chromaticism, right? So if you have, let's say, C, F, G to A minor, you could do C, F, G, secondary dominant to A minor. So you have a passing chord there. You go from 5 to the 5/7 of A minor to A. What's really cool is that if you look in the bass line, you have G to G sharp to A, or A flat, but right. So it just bridges that gap in between. And for a moment, we hear this transition chord again. That doesn't belong in the key. So it just makes our ears perk up and be like, wow, that's a pretty cool sound, So it's just finding these different different chords and just experimenting with what works and what doesn't work. And it's definitely subjective. And it really depends on the style you're going for. But I'm coming from more of the perspective of like taking a pop progression and turning it more to like a musical theater thing, or even taking a classic film scoring progression, right? And how would you change it around? I would definitely then consider stuff like chromatic medians. That's a pretty cool tool. That's basically taking any chord and going up or down a major or minor third. So that's going up to like E flat major, for example, or like C to E major, or C to E flat minor, or C to E minor. So that's going up a major or minor third, or you could go down, so C to A flat major, or C to A flat minor, C to A minor. This one's more classic, right? Because A minor is just a relative minor of C major, and then you have C to A major. So that's like, that opens the colors like immensely right there. That's just really, really cool. But anyway, I don't want to ramble. These are just a few possibilities there. So that latter example I just showed you, that's more for like film scoring applications, because they're so, these keys are so like unrelated for the most part, these chromatic medians. So you can really play around with those. But in general, when we're talking about standalone pieces of music, you want to have stuff that flows more naturally. So then you get keys that are more related with each other, and you just want to find the links between the different chords that you're actually applying. But again, just to recap, the two different methods are: number one, to extend your chord progression. So if you're thinking diatonically or just within the scale, use the other chords that belong to that scale, number one, and add them in. And then to enhance that even further, which kind of blends in with rule number 2, which is adding in chords from other scales. So it could be the relative major or minor scale, or parallel major or minor, secondary dominance, chromatic mediance for film scoring, that type of thing, and just exploring what works. It's a lot of fun, to be honest. That's how I write a lot of my music personally. So. And anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that helps, and I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you tomorrow in another Quick Tips video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.